The first time I mowed my lawn, my elderly neighbor stormed over screaming, "That's not how we do things here." I laughed, thinking she was joking, until I woke up the next morning to find my grass completely torn up. Furious, I checked my security cameras. And my jaw dropped. That evening, I knocked on her door holding a USB drive. She smirked, "You have no proof." But when the HOA president hit play at the next meeting, she stumbled back, whispers spreading around the room. I moved into my first house last spring. I'm 42, married, no kids, just a cat. My wife and I had been living in a small apartment in Bellville, Illinois for over a decade. We finally saved enough for a down payment and bought a house in a quiet neighborhood right on the edge of town. It's one of those places where all the houses look alike and the lawns are always trimmed. Peaceful, or so we thought. The house came with a decently sized yard. I was honestly excited to take care of it. After years of landlords and strict rental agreements, owning my own little patch of grass felt like freedom. We'd been living there for about 5 days. Boxes still everywhere inside, but I figured I'd take an hour to mow the lawn. It was a bit overgrown and I wanted to make a good impression. I pull out my brand new mower, nothing fancy, just a gas-powered Craftsman I bought on sale, and start doing straight-line passes from one end of the yard to the other. It was hot, but I was in a decent mood. That lasted maybe 10 minutes. About halfway through mowing, I hear someone shouting. Not just a call, full-on yelling. I look up and see the small elderly woman stomping across the street toward me. I stop the mower and take off my ear protection. "You're doing it wrong," she yells. I blinked. "Sorry. That's not how we do things here," she said, waving her arms. She was maybe in her 70s. Gray hair in a tight bun, wearing a sun hat and carrying a rolled-up newspaper in one hand like she was about to hit me with it. I genuinely thought she was messing with me. So I smiled and said, "Oh really? Didn't know there was a method." Her face did not move. "Diagonal lines. We mow in diagonals. It's how the neighborhood looks clean." I laughed, thinking it was a joke. It wasn't. "We're part of the HOA. It's in the rules," she snapped. I shrugged. "Okay, I'll keep that in mind." "You better," she said, then turned and walked back to her house. I watched her cross the street and slam her door. I should have taken the hint right then, but I didn't. I thought she was just another one of those nosy neighbors who act like they run the street. We all have them. So I finished mowing, straight lines and all. That night, I told my wife about it. She laughed and said, "Well, at least she didn't throw a rake at you." We thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. I wake up around 6:30 a.m. to get ready for work. It's a habit. I open the curtains to let some light in and immediately freeze. The lawn, my brand new, freshly cut lawn, is completely wrecked. It wasn't subtle. It looked like someone had run a rototiller through half of it. Big chunks of grass ripped out. Dirt mounds in weird spots. Uneven claw marks, almost like someone dragged something sharp across it. I go outside, thinking maybe it was animals? A raccoon or some kind of dog. Then I see it, a note taped to our front door. "We have standards here. Consider this your warning. R. Ruth." Her name was on the mailbox across the street. Ruth, my neighbor. I stood there in disbelief. My wife came out behind me and covered her mouth. "Did she do this?" "I think so," I said. "I'm gonna check the cameras." We have a basic security camera setup. Nothing fancy. A ring camera above the garage that captures the front yard and part of the sidewalk. I pull the footage on my phone and scroll to the middle of the night. At 3:12 a.m. I see movement. A figure crosses the street in a bathrobe and slippers. The person is small, but they're wearing a headlamp and they're carrying something long and metal. It's Ruth. She walks right onto our lawn and starts working like she's in a garden. For 2 hours. She uses a metal tool looked like a garden claw to dig, tear, and pull up chunks of grass. She's crouching, moving slow, taking her time. At one point, she even sprinkles something from a small bag, maybe seeds? I couldn't tell. And then she walks back across the street like she just took out the trash. The craziest part? She didn't even cover her face. The camera catches everything. It's her. I downloaded the footage and made several copies. That evening, around 7 p.m., I walked across the street and knocked on Ruth's door. I had the USB in my hand. She opened the door halfway, peeking through the screen. "Yes," she said. "Hi, Ruth. I noticed someone vandalized my yard last night." "Oh," she said, eyebrows raised. "Yeah," I said. "Luckily, I have cameras. They caught everything." Her face stayed neutral. "Cameras can't prove everything. Wanna bet?" I asked. "I didn't do anything," she said quickly and closed the door in my face. Didn't even ask what was on the footage. I wasn't going to let it go. Our neighborhood does have an HOA and I emailed the president that night. His name is Mark. Older guy, quiet, professional. I attached the video and explained the whole story in plain detail. Told him I wanted to bring it up at the next meeting. He replied the next morning, "Thank you for the footage. We'll discuss this at the upcoming meeting." It was a Wednesday night. The HOA meetings take place in the community room of the local library. My wife and I showed up 15 minutes early. The room filled up fast. A lot of older residents. Some people I hadn't met yet. Ruth sat in the front row wearing a cardigan and sipping from a pink Yeti cup like this was just another neighborhood chat. Mark started the meeting by going over the regular stuff, trash pickup delays, tree trimming, boring things. Then he cleared his throat. "We have a serious matter to address," he said. "One of our residents submitted evidence of property damage that occurred 2 nights ago. Please direct your attention to the screen." He plugged in the USB. The projector started up. Then there she was, Ruth at 3:12 a.m. sneaking across the street with her garden tools. The room went dead silent. Everyone watched as she clawed through my yard like a raccoon on Red Bull. You could hear people whispering. I looked over at Ruth. Her hand was shaking as she held her cup. Her face was pale. This isn't me, she mumbled. It's clearly you, Mark said. Your headlamp has your house number printed on the strap. She stammered. That could be anybody. Another neighbor chimed in, you've got a damn pink flamingo on your mailbox in the background. It's literally your yard behind you. Someone else said, she's been like this for years. She screamed at me for planting tulips once. The room turned. Mark looked at Ruth. You'll need to step down from your HOA committee roles immediately. We'll be forwarding this to legal for review. The damage is extensive. After the HOA meeting, Ruth stopped looking at me. She didn't wave, didn't yell, didn't even glare. Just ignored me completely. For a while, things calmed down. Mark followed up with me via email. Ruth was officially suspended from all committee roles and the HOA's lawyer was reviewing the footage for possible civil action. She was also being encouraged to pay for repairs to my lawn, but nothing was confirmed yet. I had hoped this was the end. But it wasn't. About 2 weeks later, something weird happened. It was a normal Tuesday. I get home from work, grab the mail, and there's a plain white envelope addressed to me with no return address. No stamp. It was hand-delivered. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No signature. Just a message in big, typed letters, you're not welcome here. Sell the house. Leave before it gets worse. I read it twice. I showed it to my wife. She looked scared. We installed another camera, this time facing the mailbox. That weekend I tried to forget about the letter. My new grass had started growing in and I was focused on watering it and patching spots the landscapers missed. Sunday morning I went out to check the sprinklers and noticed something strange. All the heads were missing. Every single sprinkler head had been pulled out or broken. Some were just gone, ripped clean from the base. I felt that familiar heat in my chest. I walked around the side of the house and saw something that made my blood boil. On the fence, scratched in big jagged letters, was the word, ruined. I went straight to the new camera footage. The video was short but clear. At 4:09 a.m. a figure walked right up to the house, crouched by the mailbox, and shoved something inside. A minute later, they moved toward the lawn. They weren't wearing Ruth's usual robe and slippers this time. They wore a hoodie, but when they turned around I saw the same reflective vest from before, just covered up under a jacket. It was Ruth. Same frame, same limp on the left leg. Same purse swinging from her arm. This wasn't a stranger. She was just getting smarter. I saved the footage and called the HOA president again. Mark picked up immediately. Tell me she didn't do something else. She did, I said, and explained everything. Mark didn't even wait for the next monthly meeting. He called for a special session that Friday. Once again, the community room was packed. This time, people weren't just curious, they were pissed. Mark walked up, plugged in the USB, and hit play. Silence. Then gasps. Then murmurs. Someone said, what is wrong with her? Another woman, Lorraine from 3 houses down, stood up and shouted, this is harassment. She's dangerous. Ruth didn't show up this time. That's when Mark dropped the real bomb. She's not just a member of the HOA, he said. She's on the board of directors. Her actions could legally affect us all. If this goes to court, the association may be liable for enabling her behavior. People started yelling. She screamed at my daughter for sidewalk chalk. She told my husband his beard made the street look unkempt. She left a bag of dog poop in my mailbox last Halloween. Turns out Ruth had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years, but no one had proof. Until now. The board voted unanimously to remove her. She was officially kicked off the HOA board and banned from all committee roles permanently. They also agreed to file a restraining order if anything else happened. But Ruth didn't go quietly. That weekend, a for sale sign appeared in my front yard. I didn't put it there. A handwritten sign, not even the official kind. It said, for sale by owner, get out while you can call Ruth for details. She had written her number at the bottom. I ripped it out of the ground and stormed across the street. Her curtains moved. She was watching. But she didn't come out. I called the non-emergency police line and filed another report. An officer came by, took my statement, and warned her that any more incidents would lead to criminal charges. She stopped messing with the yard. But she found new ways to be a problem. 2 weeks later, a flyer showed up in every mailbox. It wasn't from the HOA, it was handwritten and printed on pink paper. Join the Neighborhood Beauty Society. For those who believe in high standards, moral order, and proper lawn care. Led by longtime resident Ruth, last name. Meetings every Thursday at 5 p.m. Cookies provided. It was unbelievable. She was trying to form her own version of the HOA like some kind of rogue gardening cult. And people actually showed up. About 6 of them. All older. All the same crowd that used to sit next to Ruth at meetings. They wore matching pink sashes and started leaving notices on people's lawns. Not official HOA letters. Just paper slips with things like, your grass is too long. This reflects poorly on our street. Please mow in diagonals, not straight lines. Remove that lawn gnome. It's tasteless. Someone got a notice for having a trampoline. This went on for weeks. Here's where it all went from annoying to terrifying. One evening I was cleaning out the garage and found a stack of old HOA newsletters in a box left by the previous owner. One of them was from 3 years ago. Inside was a short article titled Board Votes to End Volunteer Lawn Inspections After Incident. I read it twice. The incident was vague. Just said that a resident had been warned for entering someone's yard uninvited and modifying their landscaping without permission. The person wasn't named. But at the bottom, in a small italic font, it said, "The board thanks Ruth, last name, for her many years of dedication and reminds all residents that her landscaping advice is now considered non-binding." She'd done this before. She'd actually been told to stop years ago. And somehow she was still doing it. I scanned the newsletter, made copies, and brought it to Mark. He looked at it, rubbed his forehead, and said I had forgotten about this. She almost got the HOA sued back then. She promised she was done. Looks like she wasn't. After finding that old HOA newsletter, I started digging. If Ruth had a history of this kind of behavior, there had to be more. So I did what any curious homeowner with too much time and growing rage would do. I called the previous owner of our house. Their forwarding address was still on some mail we'd gotten by mistake, and I managed to track them down on Facebook. A guy named Darren, retired, now living in Florida. I sent him a message explaining I was the new owner and asked if he'd had any issues with the neighbor across the street. He replied in less than 10 minutes. "Oh God, Ruth still lives there. She put dead fish under our porch when we refused to cut down a tree she didn't like. My wife was convinced it was a raccoon. I only found out months later when she bragged to someone at a block party. We sold and moved out the next year." He sent me screenshots from a private Facebook group called Escapees of Neighborhood Name, a literal support group for people who had lived there and left because of HOA drama mostly connected to Ruth. There were dozens of posts. Stories of her calling code enforcement over kids' bikes. Removing flowers she claimed were too exotic. Yelling at a neighbor for installing wind chimes that were too spiritual. The deeper I went, the darker it got. I brought all this to Mark, the HOA president. He was stunned. I thought she'd calmed down. I had no idea it was still going on this long. "She's never stopped," I said. "She just got smarter." Mark told me there was an upcoming HOA annual meeting, a big one, with all members required to attend. It would be the perfect place to bring this to light. So I prepared. I made copies of the newsletter, screenshots of Ruth's past, and a full timeline of her harassment since I moved in. But Ruth wasn't sitting still either. She started spreading rumors. That I was unstable. That I had been harassing her with cameras. That I was trying to take over the neighborhood. A few older residents even started giving me looks. One lady walked past my driveway and muttered, "Troublemaker." I knew what Ruth was doing, muddying the waters before the meeting. It was a packed room. More people than I'd ever seen show up. Ruth was there, of course. Front row. Pink blouse, silver brooch, her little group of sash-wearing supporters flanking her like bodyguards. Mark opened the meeting, covered basic business, and then cleared his throat. "We have a serious matter on the agenda," he said. "An ongoing pattern of misconduct, harassment, and behavior that has now placed our HOA at legal risk." Then he nodded to me. I stepped up. I don't like public speaking, but I'd had enough. I pulled out the binder I'd made and started from the beginning. The day I mowed the lawn, the grass torn up, the camera footage, the sprinkler sabotage, the anonymous letter, the fake for sale sign, the rogue flyers and neighborhood society, the previous homeowner, the dead fish. I laid it all out. No yelling, no dramatics, just facts, gasps, murmurs, whispers. You could feel the shift in the room. Then I said, "This has been going on for years, and everyone has just tolerated it. I'm not here to pick a fight, but I'm not going to pretend it's okay anymore." Mark turned to Ruth. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She stood up slowly, and then she started crying, like full-on shaking. Everyone went quiet. "I was just trying to protect the neighborhood," she said. "I worked so hard to make this place beautiful. I spent decades on this street. I planted the rose bushes by the front entrance. I led the welcome committee. I organized the 4th of July parades. And now people act like I'm the villain." A woman in the back shouted, "Because you act like one." Ruth pointed at me, voice trembling. "You don't belong here. You changed everything. You walk around like you own the place. You cut your grass in straight lines like you don't care. You don't even wave." That's when I lost it. I waved the first day I moved in. You yelled at me about grass. You tore up my lawn. You lied. You harassed me. You manipulated people. You never wanted peace. You wanted control. The room went silent again. Then Mark stood up. "I think we've heard enough." Ruth was removed from the HOA entirely. Not just banned from the board. Removed. She received an official cease and desist letter from the HOA's lawyer. She was fined for the damages to my property. She tried to appeal. She failed. Her little beauty society dissolved within a week. People started talking. The truth spread fast once it was out in the open. One of her former friends, a woman named Dot, stopped by my house a few days later. "I'm sorry," she said. "We all knew she had issues. We just let her run things. She always talked louder than anyone else. Guess that was easier than standing up to her." I didn't say much. Just nodded. Ruth still lives across the street. We don't talk. She doesn't wave. I don't either. Sometimes she sits on her porch and just stares at nothing. Her yard isn't perfect anymore. It's overgrown in spots. A little wild. No more flyers. No more screaming. Just silence. And honestly, that silence is louder than anything else. I've thought a lot about everything that happened. How one person left unchecked for years can poison an entire street. How easy it is to stay quiet. How hard it is to speak up. I'm not proud of everything I said. I didn't want to break her. I just wanted her to stop. But sometimes the truth breaks things anyway. My lawn's doing fine now. Grass is thick and even. Straight lines. Just how I like it. I mow with my headphones in. No one bothers me anymore. And sometimes that's all the peace a person needs.